Hey, welcome to part 2 of a 2-part series over selling your house without a realtor. Now, in this video, we're going to be talking about the entire process, start to finish, really not detailed, but from a 30,000 foot perspective. We're going to be talking about some of the do's and the don'ts. But if you're curious about the contract itself and specifically how to write up that contract and details on it, that's what we talked about in part 1. So make sure you go check out part 1 if you haven't seen it yet. And if you're ready to see the process and the do's and the don'ts, we will jump into that right now. Okay, so before we jump into this video, I'm going to say the same note that I said in the first video. There's going to be a little bit of differences here if you're talking to an investor buyer or a standard, just normal everyday buyer. If those differences come up as we're talking through specifically, especially the process, I will make a note of that. If there's really no difference, then we won't talk about a difference because there is no difference. But let's talk about what's going to be the process and what that process is going to look like. So, if you're working with an investor, something to note is that typically a lot of this process, if you're working with a good investor, especially an investor from My Home Option, a lot of this process is going to be handled for you because that's a part of what they do and the service that they're offering to you. With a normal buyer, especially if there's no agent on either side of the transaction, a lot of the work is going to be on you and the buyer. So just make sure you understand what you're taking on before you take on a process one way or another. So we'll talk about the process for an investor buyer first, and then secondly, we'll talk about the process if you're working with just a standard buyer, how to get through that process successfully. So first off, with an investor, you've got to obviously contact somebody. Usually this is done randomly on the internet, Facebook ad, billboards. Really wouldn't recommend that. I definitely would recommend if you're thinking about going with an investor buyer, I would just have to say, please call up our team at myhomeoption.com. It's a free call, but we want to make sure that your best interest is kept in mind. We want to make sure that your equity isn't just completely stolen from you because of some, poor handled, I don't even know what to say. To be honest with you, it's just so much better. I've seen so many people put in bad situations from bad investors. And let me tell you, there are great investors and then there are bad investors. And being an investor doesn't make you bad, but there are definitely bad investors. So just make sure, please, that you don't work with a bad investor. Work with a good investor, somebody who's qualified to do this, somebody who's reputable, and somebody who's going to be looking out for your best interest, please. If there's anything else you get from this video, make sure you work with a reputable, strong, good investor. So anyways, after you find your investor and you give them some info, there's probably going to be a walkthrough that's set up if a walkthrough is required. Now, there are some investor buyers that don't require walkthroughs, but a lot of them do. So you're going to do that walkthrough. After the walkthrough, you're going to talk through numbers, and then eventually you're going to agree to an offer. And there's a couple different ways that investors could make offers. There's really, two main ways. One being a cash offer. Second way being with creative financing. So that cash offer is obviously going to be probably a full cash price. If you're going back to the contract, you'd have your cash, you'd have zero on financing, and the total amount would just be the cash. If you're dealing with somebody who's doing creative financing, it might be a little bit of cash down, some loan assumption or subject to, or some seller financing, owner financing stuff. So you just make sure you fill that out appropriately. Check part 1 if you need more info on the contracts and how to fill that out. That's pretty much, you're going to get some sort of offer that you agree to. Now, it is important to note here, you've got to be careful who you sell or finance to, you owner finance to, because you are giving away your rights to that property. So just make sure, again, I cannot stress how important it is to work with a reputable investor buyer throughout this process. Next thing you're going to do after you agree to an offer, you're going to fill out the contract, sign the contract. Make sure you protect yourself by watching part 1. Make sure you understand what you're signing by watching part 1. And I highly recommend that you only use Texas Real Estate Commission or TREC contracts during this process. TREC, it's free to everybody. You can go to trec.org, I believe, but you can just look up Texas Real Estate Commission. They make these in order to protect real estate agents and homeowners. So you're a homeowner, make sure you protect yourself. A couple other things that you're going to need to fill out on top of the contract is a lead-based paint disclosure if your home was built before 1978. You also are going to need a seller's disclosure that kind of talks about all the different things within a home. We've got videos over both of those on how to fill those out. You can check those out. And then also any other applicable addendums that are needed throughout the contract, like a loan assumption or a seller financing or any of that kind of stuff. After that, you're going to get the option money. Typically you're going to get option money as the home seller if you're working with an investor. They might just give it to you cash, write up the receipt there, and then you need to ensure that the earnest money is delivered to the title office. If they don't deliver the earnest money to the title office in time, the contract is considered null and void. So make sure that the earnest money does get to the title office. Make sure that title is doing their work, doing the process, pushing everything through. There will probably be a time where contractors may come through, the investor may bring contractors through to walk your home, just to get some bids and repair estimates ahead of time. But typically they're buying your house as is. They're not going to come back with repair amendments or anything like that. They're just wanting to figure out what needs to be done. So when they purchase it, they're ready to move forward. Then your option period will end. Title will finish their process and you will close. It's a pretty seamless process. If you're working with a normal buyer, there's a couple more steps that get thrown in there. So it gets a little more crazy. And so that's why another reason some people like to go with an investor buyer. It just keeps things simple. But with a normal buyer, you're going to first off have to market it. Part of that's usually cleaning it, staging it, getting your photos, doing any minor repairs, anything like that. Anything that an agent would typically do on the front end. Once you find somebody, you've marketed it, you have to agree on a price, sign contracts, ensure that you both understand what you're signing. I can't even explain to you how important it is to understand the contract that you're signing before you sign it. Make sure you do your lead-based paint, your seller's disclosure, any other applicable addendums as needed. And then you need to get it to the title office. Now, with an investor buyer, they're typically taking care of this. With agents, they're typically taking care of this. But if you don't have either of those, this is on you. So make sure that you find a reputable title company to use. Make sure you get it to title and make sure that title is getting their job done well and efficiently. Stay on top of the communication with title. I recommend communicating with them often, if not daily. And make sure that also the earnest money gets delivered to title by the buyer. This is very important. And then also I would make sure you're following up with the buyer to ensure that they are talking with their lender. Make sure they're getting their appraisal set up, making sure that they're, pre-approved, all that kind of good stuff. Make sure that they're getting all that done. And also, if you're doing like a cash deal or seller financing or subject to deal or any of that kind of stuff, it's a lot simpler here. But if you're doing financing, there'll be a couple more, pieces there at the end, that could come into play. Next thing that's probably going to happen at this point is an inspection. And there may be a repair amendment that is added to change the contract and some updates or repairs or things that they need done that came up during the inspection. There is a TREC contract for repair amendments. We'll probably have a video on that, so make sure that you check that out if needed. After you agree on your repairs and the date for option, usually that's like right there, the day before option ends, you agree on your repairs. You finally finish everything up. Sometimes options even extended with it's another amendment. It's a standard amendment form that you can use to extend the option period. But typically it's right there at the very end. Then option ends. And it is your job as a seller to get those repairs done before closing, however much time you have left. And also during that process, the appraisal is going to happen if it's applicable. If your buyer is using financing, there will be an appraisal that's done kind of at that end, kind of near the end of the transaction. If it doesn't meet, if the price that, let's say that you're selling the house for $200,000 only appraises at $180,000, then it's going to be up to the buyer to either bring more cash to the table. There's going to have to be an adjustment on price, or you guys are just going to have to agree that the contract just doesn't work out. And sometimes, even if option is over, the buyer can still get their earnest money back after the appraisal if the appraisal doesn't mate, just depending on how the appraisal addendum was written up. So just make sure that the lending addendum, appraisal, all that kind of stuff, you understand how that's written ahead of time. You can check out the videos that we have on that. And then once title is clear, you've got all the financing lined up and all your T's are crossed, I's are dotted, you get to closing days, and you give the keys to title and you get your check or your wire, and the ownership is transferred over to the new homeowners, the buyers. And a special note here for you during this process is, I would say, don't forget to turn off your utilities the day of or the day after closing. It's really important that you're not paying for those more than you have to be. And also just remember to cancel other little services like home cleaning and pool cleaning and mowing and all those little things. Make sure that all those are just done and canceled. Like I said, usually people are canceling that day of, day after closing. That way there's not paying for anything unnecessarily. And now jump on to some of the do's and the don'ts. We'll go through these super quick, but these are important. Number one, do understand all the contracts before signing. Don't sign something because it sounds good or you get uncomfortable. Make sure you truly understand what you're signing, and don't let yourself get backed into a corner. Don't freeze, don't get uncomfortable. Make sure you're talking to one of our experts to make sure that you're working with a qualified professional who's not going to try to bully you or back you into a corner. Next thing, do stay on top of communication. Don't assume that the buyer and title and everybody else is getting everything done right and on time. It is up to you to get this contract done, because you're not working with a real estate agent, you're not working with an investor, so it is your responsibility to get everything done. Do work with a reputable buyer if possible. Don't work with somebody who is shady. Even someone nice can try to steal your home legitimately, so make sure you are extremely careful about that. Do choose a great title company to work with who does what they do amazingly. Don't get stuck with a bad title company who can't get you to the closing table on closing day. And lastly, do save yourself time, trouble, and tension. I said tension instead of stress there to go with the triple T's there. So time, trouble, tension, and call myhomeoption.com. I would say don't try to wing this and do it on your own and get a big loss at the end of a long transaction. So to close, make sure that you watch part 1 if you need anything over those contracts. Make sure you check out all of our other videos on our page, and make sure that you go to myhomeoption.com where you can schedule a call with our team. And you can also check out our resource pages. We will probably have links to contracts there. We'll have links to some blogs and links to other resources that could really help you out through this process. So like I said, myhomeoption.com, get in contact with us and make this the best process ever. See you on the next video.